All right, it looks like we have a good amount of people in here, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, and thank you for joining us for this Education Transformation 2020 presentation, Producing Poor Products. Does your digital course content meet accessibility standards? My name is Sydney Smith, and I'm an educational courseware representative here at Hawks Learning. Our speakers today are Chrystal Trapani and Kristin White of Old Dominion University. Professor Chrystal Trapani is an instructional technologist with the Center of Learning and Teaching as an adjunct instructor in the Department of English at Old Dominion University. Chrystal has crafted tech-forward activities in her composition courses for over 12 years. She blends her experience working with first-generation and non-traditional students, curriculum development, creating interactive and accessible online course content, and training and mentoring faculty in order to help them achieve positive student outcomes and success. In working with faculty, she helps her colleagues gain strong working knowledge of how to make course content successful for students of all learning abilities. Chrystal continues her commitment to teaching so she can share personal classroom experience with faculty. Kristin White is an instructional technologist with the Center of Learning and Teaching at Old Dominion University as well. She is the university's lead Zoom trainer. Kristin has been an integral part of ODU's transition to remote teaching during COVID-19 and continues to develop and facilitate faculty support on topics including Zoom, Blackboard, VoiceThread, Kaltura, and other instructional technologies via workshops, consultations, videos, and support documentation. While building online interactive activities for faculty, she has noticed the absence of basic accessibility knowledge and does her best to inform and educate others on how to make content accessible to all learners. We are excited that Professors Trapani and White are here to share their experience and insight with us today. We do have a large audience, and we will do our best to get to as many questions as possible. Taylor Ireland of Hawks, an educational courseware representative, is also joining us in the background of the webinar today. She is here to help answer questions throughout the webinar, so please enter those into the Q&A as we go, and she will write back to you. If you have questions for Professors Trapani and White, we'll save those for the end of the presentation. On that note, I'll hand it over to our presenters. The floor is yours, professors.
Thanks. Thank you, Sydney. So thank you for joining us. And before we begin, we'd like to ask everyone if you'll take a piece of paper and something to write with for an activity we'll be doing later out. That would be great. And today we are going to thank you for joining us for producing poor products. Does your digital content, course content meet accessibility standards? And by the end of the webinar, the participants should be able to recall the POUR acronym meaning, associate situations where students need accessible content that's not disability related, recognize the importance of focusing on accessibility proactively rather than retroactively, and identify common accessibility standards to implement into your own content creation. It's impossible, excuse me, I'm sorry. It is impossible for us to cover everything that is required for your digital course content to meet accessibility standards during our presentation, but today we're going to be hitting on the highlights. So what is POUR? POUR stands for the 4 principles that describe functional accessibility outlined by Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, also known as WCAG. Once you produce digital course content, whether it's Word, PowerPoint, or something of the like, and send it to your students via the internet, such as Google Classroom, Blackboard, or another LMS, it must meet 508 and WCAG standards for web-based content. So how do you make your content accessible? You have to ask yourself questions such as, is it perceivable? Are you providing a text alternative for non-text content? Are you captioning multimedia? Are you presenting content in different ways? Is your content operable? Is all functionality available from the keyboard alone? Does it allow enough time to read content? Does it help users navigate and find content? Is it understandable? Does content appear and operate predictably? Does it help users avoid and correct errors? And is it robust? Does it maximize compatibility with current and future user tools such as web browsers? If so, you're on the right track to creating accessible digital course content. Often accessibility is associated with disability, but it's important to recognize that accessibility helps everyone. This table provides examples of situational and temporary circumstances where students would benefit from accessible content even though they may not have a permanent visual, motor, hearing, or cognitive disability. We aren't going to go over the examples, but they are available to provide context on how accessible content can help all learners. So how can we put some of those core principles into action? The first item we're going to be looking at is using built-in formatting and features. Much of our content focuses on the use of an assistive technology called the screen reader. You'll be hearing an example of a screen reader later. If you're unfamiliar with what it is, WebAIM defines it as an assistive technology that converts digital text into synthesized speech. They empower users to hear content and navigate with the keyboard. The technology helps people who are blind or who have low vision to use information technology with the same level of independence and privacy as anyone else. Screen readers are also used by people with certain cognitive or learning disabilities or users who simply prefer audio content over text. So how can we make our digital content accessible for assistive technologies such as a screen reader? The first item we'll look at is titles and headings. I'm actually going to show some examples. So if I go to this Word document, you'll notice on the left side I have the navigation pane open, and using titles and headings makes it easy to navigate and understand the structure of the document. Additionally, this same document is open as a Google Doc, and you'll notice that the navigation feature is also available here. And last, in PowerPoint, you'll notice an outline view, very similar features. In addition to the titles and headings in PowerPoint, you also need to be aware that you are using slide titles and built-in layouts. When we say built-in layouts, we mean you're using the placeholder cells for elements such as text, titles, images, etc. within your slide. And this is important rather than adding them, because if you add them, it's not always read in the order that you intended or read at all. And let's get back to our presentation. And we are in Google Slides. So unfortunately, Google Slides doesn't have outline view, but does have the titles and layout features similarly to PowerPoint. An additional thing you should think about when creating your course content is creating lists. This will help to organize information, and it also notifies screen readers of its organization. But it's important that you use the built-in bullets and numbered lists rather than using your own spacing or tab to produce the layout. Tables are complicated. Please see the Use Tables Wisely section below in the how-to for more details. Tables should be used for data, not layout. And here are some basics to consider when creating tables. You should specify your column header rows. You shouldn't merge or split cells. You shouldn't use text wrapping. And your images should be actual text data, not saved as images. And the last feature we're looking at is the built-in formatting tool called columns. This should be used sparingly. Not all screen readers will identify columns without you specifying the reading order to ensure flow of text is coherent. And columns are actually unavailable in Google Slides if you're using them, so it's imperative that you actually edit the reading order to make sure it's flowing correctly. Before we move on, you may have noticed the image of the speaker is blurry on this slide. When adding elements to digital content, make sure that they can be zoomed or magnified up to 200% and remain crisp and clear. Many students are only using mobile technology to access course content, so they'll be enlarging your content often. Now, we want you to experience what it's like to listen to content using a screen reader. While you're listening, think about where you think this link is going to bring us. Where are we going?
Links.
Ooh, let me make sure. I'm sorry, I didn't share my computer sound. I apologize. Let me do that one more.
Start https://www.google.com/map/dir/hype+park+Londo selected. N+UK/old+coffee+house+49+beak+street+Soho.
Okay, that was just part of what the text or the screen reader would be reading. If you heard that audio, would you be able to understand where that link was leading you? Probably not. This is actually what it was reading out loud. This link is almost impossible to comprehend when spoken aloud, as you heard in the recording, because it lacks the context and purpose of the link. And you'll also notice there's one more accessibility consideration on this slide. It is currently displaying what's considered to be a wall of text. Rather than outlining it and using the 7x7 rule, no more than 7 bullets and 7 words for each bullet and using clear, plain, and concise language. So let's take a look at what it would be like if we use descriptive text instead of the long URL. In case you hadn't guessed it, we were going to get directions from Hyde Park to the old coffee house using the London Underground. Let's listen to what you would hear if the descriptive text link was used rather than the URL.
Link start directions from Hyde Park to the old coffee house. Link end on Beak Street using the London Underground.
For links to provide context and purpose, so they are understandable, they should use unique descriptive text, avoid using meaningless text such as click here, the website, link, etc. And when linking out to other content, you must identify the type of file or source next to the descriptive link, such as PDF, PowerPoint, Word, etc. Links should also be the only underlined text in your content, because using underlines for anything other than hyperlinks confuses learners because they perceive underlined text to lead to hyperlinked material. You'll also notice that the link is underlined and they are different colors. And this is because meaning or importance should be conveyed by more than color alone. And now I'm going to turn it over to Chrystal.
I think you were muted.
I was, yep. So you asked your friend, you and your friend are going to meet for coffee, and you quickly text her asking, what is the weather? And she sends you this screenshot. Can you tell if you need an umbrella if you're using a text-to-speech tool? Let's find out. If you want to progress for me, Kristin.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Thank you. So let's compare how the two sound. I'll have Kristin play what the screenshot sounds like.
Record displaying screenshot 2020081832,736.png.
From that, would you know if you need an umbrella? No, you have no idea. Whenever you scan a document such as a textbook or old worksheet and you upload it for your students to access, their screen readers can't read it. Just like you can't tell if you need to bring an umbrella, your students can't tell what's on the PDF you scanned. However, if you provide an actual table, this is what it sounds like.
3x6 table. Start row 1, column 1 heading 1 day, column 2 heading 1 temperature, column 3 heading 1 forecast, row 2, column 1 Tuesday, column 2 74, column 3 partly cloudy, row.
Oops, sorry.
No, you're fine. So you know now it's going to be partly cloudy. You don't need to bring that umbrella. You can leave it at home. The same as, and this works just like it does for PDFs. If you want to go to the next slide. So there's this myth that accessible content means boring. The reality is all of our presentation except for this slide is entirely accessible. Color contrast is the difference in color brightness of objects such as text, images, and shapes compared to the surrounding background colors. So let's talk about why it's important to be cognizant of the colors you're using. Kristin's currently using an add-on to show you what color combinations look like to someone with different types of color blindness. Just because something looks good to you doesn't mean it's necessarily legible for somebody else. And there's some ways you can make sure that content meets color contrast standards. Ideally, you'll check color contrast before you even start building. Kristin's showing you this tool that's called ColorSafe that will help you build an accessible palette. You tell ColorSafe what color you want to use, and you verify and make sure the settings are all as you want them, and you go ahead and click Generate Color Palette, and it gives you all kinds of options that work with the colors you're using. Now, let's say you have to go back and you want to check your older documents that you've already made, and you want to check and make sure they meet color contrast. You can use WebAIM's Color Contrast Checker. You put the color in you've used and see if it meets accessibility guidelines. If they don't, as you can see, Kristin's got a bunch of fails up, you can use the slider bars to adjust the colors until they meet standards. Foreground is your text color, where background is your background color. In addition to color, you also want to think about the font you're using. Decorative fonts might look pretty, but they're hard for students with disabilities to read. You want to make sure you're using sans serif fonts whenever possible. The serif is that little decorative line found on letters, such as the tail on a lowercase a. Think of all the loops and tails on cursive letters. Those are all serifs. So a sans serif font means it's without those lines. Sans serif fonts are much easier for students who have processing and visual disabilities to use. So we've met up with our friend at the coffee house, and you've gone up and ordered, and the barista asks you if you want some latte art. You ask them to describe it. So we're going to give you the experience that someone using a screen reader has when receiving alt text for an image. Using the pen and paper we asked you to get at the beginning, see if you can draw the latte art based on the barista's description.
Latte foam bear.
And we'll give you all a minute to kind of scribble. Okay, so we'll just, now you've had a second to draw. Let's try again with this more robust, accurate alternative text.
Bear floating on back in latte foam with all paws sticking out and a sleeping face with rosy cheeks. The ears have brown tips.
Give everybody a few more seconds, just because that one was a bit more involved. All right, let's go on and look at what we were drawing. So this was what we were describing to you. If you compare your two drawings to the image, which one's closer? Probably your second image is a lot closer than your first image. Alternative text needs to be added to any non-text content that's required for understanding. Any images, pictures, and videos that are required for understanding has to have good alternative text, because assistive technologies can't read them otherwise. If an image is decorative, such as that brown line that's on the left side of our slide right now, you should either mark it with double quotation marks, which tells the screen reader, hey, skip over this, or if you are using a program that has the ability to mark an image as decorative, you should do that. If you have an image that your student needs to understand, such as like a technical drawing to master the concept, and your alt text is just technical drawing, this is going to help them understand the material just as much as that alt text, latte foam bear, helped you understand that you were ordering this. When you're writing alt text, you want to make sure you don't say things like image of or picture of, as a screen reader is already going to identify that. Additionally, your alt text should not be an exact match of any captions provided, because the screen reader is just going to read the exact same thing twice. It's not helping your students any. You want to avoid any kind of text within images whenever possible. However, we know that sometimes that's not possible, such as like a company's logo. So you just want to make sure, if you can't not have text in your image, you make sure you provide in your alternative text what the text says. So for ease of understanding, we've actually created a checklist to share with Hawks, which is going to be shared out with y'all for you to use to check your course content. And while we were not able to address everything to make your course accessible, we've tried to make this an overview of all of the highlights. So now we're going to kind of turn it over to Q&A. And if you're not comfortable kind of reaching out there, or you want more information, you can certainly reach out to Kristin and I afterwards.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys so much for that great presentation. We did have one question that came through, and the instructor asked to tell the screen reader to skip. Does it use double quotation marks, or is it just one double quotation mark?
So it's going to be quotation marks, space, and then quotation marks.
Okay.
And that just, the screen reader just skips right over it and doesn't read it as anything.
Yeah, in Microsoft products, there's actually a way to mark them as decorative. There's just a checkbox, but in areas that you don't have that ability, that's going to be the way to make the screen reader read over it.
Yeah, so like for Google Docs or Google Slides, you can't, there's not a decorative option. You have to go through and actually do the quotation marks.
And then also Taylor Ireland had a question, and she is curious, what has inspired you both to pursue this topic?
So we work a lot one-on-one with faculty, and we've noticed that with many faculty, accessibility is not a discussion that's going on within their departments, and making sure course content is accessible to all of our students is important. we want to make sure, faculty are putting all of this work into their course content. And if they've made all this work, they've done all this effort, they want their students to be successful. And so if it's not set up to be accessible to begin with, all that work can be for naught for some students.
And I think one of the other things to know is a lot of times when we hear accessibility, like we mentioned, you associated that with somebody needing an accommodation, and that isn't the case. A lot of our students, especially right now with COVID, are experiencing different circumstances than they normally do in their dorm or in the library, and they need some of these things to be able to function even in their current environments, whether it's the captioning for their videos, or they're listening through like a text-to-speech version of things. I mean, these are things that are not just for somebody who does have a permanent or disability that has an accommodation that needs to be met.
Now, whenever somebody says, well, I don't have any students with accommodations letters, do I need to worry about making subtitles for my video? I remind them, like, think of the student who they have to get in their car and go sit in the parking lot at McDonald's to use their Wi-Fi to do their work. They need those closed captions.
I see a couple questions I think Taylor is putting here. So it feels a little overwhelming to a newbie, but it also feels like doing something is better than nothing. Yes, we definitely agree.
Yes.
If you are using Microsoft products, which is, even if you're making something into a PDF, the suggestion is to always start with your Microsoft products and then convert them, because the conversion should keep most of what you've put in for the accessibility features. It's much more difficult to work with a PDF and make it accessible after the fact. And so what we would suggest is actually Microsoft has a lot of resources. We've linked to them. I'll go back to the slide really quick, so bear with me for just a second so I can get to the correct slide. On this, I know this is like a really, really overwhelming slide, but part of the reason we did that is because we linked to a bunch of the resources to help you. There are cheat sheets. There are also things specifically on Microsoft. They have an accessibility page that what the accessibility checker goes over if you're not familiar with the accessibility checker. The checklist that we're also providing has kind of more details on this, including the rationale as well as some of these resources right there with it, so that you can more easily navigate through that. But yes, today we covered like the ones that are more encompassing to everything you're working on, whether it's Word document or if it's Google something. And so yes, it can be overwhelming, I agree. But yes, something is better. Don't you agree, Chrystal?
Yes, something is better than nothing. At least if you, and I know some schools have an accessibility coach you can reach out to, and I know some schools have nobody, and then there's people in between. So we're just going, okay, this is overwhelming and it's a lot. Let me go back and work on starting to make my course content accessible, or let me going forward work on stuff like that. That's all part of the idea is we're all instructors, right? We learn all the time, and so if you're working on applying those things, eventually you'll have this repository of documents that are all accessible.
And the question about alternative text showing up on the screen, no, it doesn't actually show up on the screen. It's literally in the background, and that's what the screen reader will identify to somebody who's using a screen reader. So it will say image, and then it will give the description that you've provided in the alternative text. Note
if you go to the slide with the bear, it's got the alt text.
Let me get out and I'll come down. So in Google, just so you know, you're right-clicking Google as well as in Microsoft products to get to alt text. And when you go to alt text, something to note is the title in this area is actually not where you put it. You put it in the description. So make sure you're putting it in the correct spot so that it reads it out loud. But you right-click to get to it. If it's something like we said that's just decorative, you can do the quote space quote. I'm going back to the Q&A, sorry. Where can they learn more on basics on making our courses more accessible? Like we said, there are so many resources out there. What we tried to do is make a list. It's not all encompassing. There are so many things that you really are supposed to be following, and it's difficult for it not to feel overwhelming to see it in this long list that we've provided. However, at least in there, we've linked out to specific resources for you. And if you're looking for that when you get the slides, just so you're aware, on this one, the Google Doc is actually what's going to pull you directly to the checklist. It is not like a PDF checklist currently where you just check it, but you can, you can make a copy of this because it's view only. If you don't know how to make a copy, you do file and make a copy right here. You can make a copy for yourself. So you have that. We have both the standards and then we have rationale and resources. We've created areas for text and presentation like Microsoft products as well as Google. And then if you're doing audio only or if you're working on video, and then some just general ideas behind them as well.
And if you're wanting to do some extra reading, we actually provided a reference page to some resources that we thought would be helpful. So different kind of pointed specific websites. We linked out to a couple of screen readers. So if you wanted to download a screen reader and be able to check your own documents and see how it reads, it's an option. I know Kristin and I will go, hang on, let me pull up the screen reader and see if it reads it. We do that a lot.
The Microsoft equation editors, are they accessible to screen readers? That is a great question. I do not know the answer off the top of my head. Do you know, Chrystal?
I don't know.
That is something we can definitely check into. I'm not positive. Can you take a note of that one, Chrystal, so we make sure we touch base with somebody on that? That's a great question, though. If we make media file in Canvas, it does not have closed captions. How do we get closed captions on Canvas media? Okay, so Canvas, your LMS, I'm assuming, and that might be something that you're going to need to talk to your school about, unfortunately, because it depends on the player that is being used in Canvas. It depends. So if it's built right in, like we use Kaltura at our school and we have machine generated, but just so you know, anything that's machine generated is actually not sufficient. You do still need to go back and human edit those because they don't always pick up what you're stating properly. So unfortunately, I don't have a straight answer for that because it depends on what tool. Sometimes you can integrate even Kaltura. It just depends on which video editing and video player you're using. How do you actually make text accessible? So text, are you saying text on a Word document, or because when you're typing text, yes, it's going to be accessible as long as it's not in a text box in a Word or Google Doc. But what we're discussing about the titles and headings, this is going to make it much more, I mean, from here, I can literally click to any point of the document and it pulls me to there. And that's just from us using the different headings. So you only want to use one title and you can use one subtitle. And then if you have sections, you're going to use headings rather than bold and italics because your students won't be able to first see it in the navigation pane, as well as additionally, so that's for your visible students, and for screen readers, they can tab to each section if they need to recheck something or re-listen to something. They don't have to literally use the arrow to go down, 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 down and get to the section because they don't have a way to get to it easily. So you're not going to skip headings either. You want to go from heading 1 to heading 2. Make sure you're staying using the semantics so it's going in order. But that's going to be how you're making that text accessible, the best way to make it accessible. Any other things to add to that, Chrystal?
No, I think you're right, and I have the answer to the math question.
Okay, go ahead.
The answer to the math question is you have to download an add-on. It's called Math Type, T-Y-P-E. It's all one word. And that add-on is completely accessible to screen readers and will read equations.
Is that from Microsoft or was that from Google though?
It looks like it's a Microsoft add-on. I've found it on a couple different universities' websites.
I was just asking to verify it wasn't just a Google add-on. Okay. Are there ways we can make the images and videos, YouTube videos, more accessible for students with vision impairments? Okay, that's a great question. So if it's actually, they have to understand what that image is, you need to actually describe it verbally so it's in the synchronized captioning, closed captioning. And if you don't do that, what you would do is you would actually provide that as a descriptive text that would get added to your closed captioning. Because if they need to understand it for context and it's not just decorative, they need the screen reader or they need something to be reading it to them if they have visual impairment. Anything to add to that, Chrystal?
No, and kind of a good example, you said YouTube videos. We found that our experience has been that a lot of faculty will use the whiteboard in Zoom meetings, or they'll screen share and they'll be like, see here, and then just start talking. A student who has a visual disability cannot see here. They need you to explain, here on this chart, the second line says whatever it says, and then talk about it. They need you to provide that description.
And that's something you have to like train yourself to do. It's not easy.
Yeah.
I mean, we find ourselves still making the mistake and adding it later to the actual closed caption. I mean, don't expect that you're gonna fix everything on your first go or anything. There is a lot to think about. We know.
Yeah, no, I fixed the video last night for my class that I used last semester. I was like, they can't see where that is.
Any other questions?
We did have a few questions actually coming through the chat instead of Q&A, so let me pull those out really quick. One of them asked, could you show us a picture, or could you show a picture of a selfie on a syllabus with correct text below or around it? I'm guessing he's asking if that would then be acceptable.
Yes. So, okay. So if you are not, this is like for complex images, is it kind of where this kind of comes in more into play more than like a selfie. You could, if it's a picture of yourself, you could literally say it's a picture of me and just say where you were or something very basic. It doesn't have to be like, I'm wearing a hat and the sun is putting a shadow, you know, on the side of my face. It doesn't have to be to the point. That's not really adding anything to the content, right? So in that point, you're only building so much as you want. Now, complex images, like like Chrystal mentioned, like of the chart or something that's more complex, that's somehow an image that wasn't built a different way, you would probably want to provide, instead of alternative text, you'll give like a brief description, and then you would actually give them context in the text part of the document or whatever you're creating, because that's going to be sometimes a paragraph long to describe, to give them the context of what is visually being seen by somebody who can see it.
Yeah, if you're describing something like a chemistry molecule, which Kristin and I worked with this summer, your alt text might be very long.
Describing tetrahedral stuff that I don't even want to get back into. There was another one about latex be used online. Can text written in latex be used online? I believe it can be. We can check into that. We do have some faculty that do use it. I have not done a lot of testing in regards to the latex though themselves, whether or not they're reading. I've been using superscript and subscript, just basic, not actually the latex. I think there was, in a Word document, does the screen reader read out loud which font is in? No, it generally doesn't. I actually do think some screen readers do allow them to identify those things, but that's part of the reason why titles and headings are so important. Don't just use different types of fonts. You can use different types of fonts, but if they aren't identified as a certain type of heading, it doesn't show them that it's a new section or that it's a new content that you're getting to. So that's why that semantics of using these headings to help them understand as well as navigate are really important.
Yeah, you always want to make sure you're delineating importance by more than one way. So don't just underline or only underline links. Don't just bold it or don't just highlight it. You want to make sure that you're, so like if you just switch fonts to try to explain something to a student, they might not be able to get it that way. So you always want to make sure you're trying to give it two ways to show some sort of importance.
And so I saw in the Q&A, I saw LaTeX instead of what we are used to hearing is latex. Oh, it's pronounced LaTeX, but I got it. Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. It seems that we've gone to every question that has been entered, and we are about just out of time. So thank you so much to Professor Trapani and Professor White, and thank you all for attending today. If you do have any questions, please direct them to us at marketing@hawkslearning.com, and we will also be emailing you all with a link to view this webinar on demand. So thank you so much again, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.